Well, folks, it seems America's got a new crush, and it's not the latest TikTok trend. It's social conservatism, and it's making a comeback like a pair of high-waisted jeans you thought you'd never see again. Now, before you start digging out your leg warmers, let's unpack what's going on. Recent polls show a significant uptick in Americans identifying as conservative, particularly on social issues. It seems like we're moving away from the live and let live vibe and heading towards a do as I say, not as I do kind of world. Now, some might say this is just a blip, a temporary reaction to the craziness of the past few years. But hold on, because the numbers tell a different story. We've seen a consistent trend of conservative viewpoints gaining traction, especially among younger generations. This isn't your grandma's conservatism, folks. This is a new breed, fueled by social media, economic anxieties, and a healthy dose of cultural backlash. And it's shaking up the political landscape like a toddler who's just discovered the word no. But what does this all mean for the average American? Well, it depends on who you ask. Conservative pundits are popping champagne corks, celebrating the return to traditional values. Meanwhile, progressives are sounding the alarm, fearing a rollback of hard-won social progress. But one thing's for sure. This shift towards social conservatism is going to have a major impact on everything from healthcare to education to, well, just about every aspect of our lives. So buckle up, Buttercup, because we're in for a wild ride. Let's start with the elephant in the room, or rather the fetus in the uterus abortion. It's the hottest of hot-button issues, and it's become ground zero in the fight over social conservatism. Recent years have seen a wave of restrictive abortion laws sweeping across the nation, leaving many women with fewer rights than a character in a Margaret Atwood novel. From heartbeat bills to waiting periods to parental notification laws, it seems like lawmakers are determined to make abortion as difficult and emotionally draining as possible. Now, proponents of these laws argue that they're protecting the unborn, upholding the sanctity of life. But critics point out that these laws disproportionately impact low-income women and women of color, turning a legal medical procedure into a logistical nightmare. It's almost as if they're more concerned with controlling women's bodies than actually supporting families and children. And let's not forget the chilling effect these laws have on doctors, who are increasingly hesitant to provide abortion care for fear of legal repercussions. It's a real mess, folks, and it's only getting messier. But the abortion battle isn't just playing out in state legislatures, it's also a major flashpoint in the culture wars, with both sides digging in their heels and refusing to budge. Pro-life groups are organizing protests, bombarding politicians with calls and pouring money into anti-abortion campaigns. Meanwhile, pro-choice advocates are fighting back, launching legal challenges, mobilizing voters, and making their voices heard loud and clear. It's a battle for hearts and minds, and it's one that shows no signs of abating anytime soon. Alright, let's move on to another hot-button issue that's been heating up faster than a microwave burrito: transgender rights. From bathroom bills to sports bans to restrictions on gender-affirming care, transgender individuals are facing an onslaught of legislation aimed at limiting their rights and erasing their identities. It's enough to make you wonder if lawmakers have binged a little too much Handmaid's Tale and got some ideas. Now, proponents of these laws often cloak their arguments in concerns about protecting children or preserving women's sports. But critics argue that these laws are discriminatory, harmful, and based on misinformation and fear-mongering. They point out that transgender youth are already facing higher rates of bullying and suicide, and that denying them access to healthcare and support only exacerbates these problems. It's almost as if some folks are so terrified of anything that challenges their narrow worldview that they're willing to throw an entire community under the bus. But the fight for transgender rights is far from over. Transgender individuals and their allies are organizing, protesting, and demanding to be heard. They're challenging discriminatory laws in court, educating the public about transgender issues, and working to create a more inclusive and accepting society. It's a David and Goliath battle, but they're not backing down. Because when it comes to basic human rights, there's no room for compromise. Hold on to your textbooks, folks, because the culture wars have invaded the classroom, and they're armed with more than just none-two pencils. From debates over critical race theory to book bans to restrictions on LGBTQ+ content, it seems like everyone's got an opinion on what should and shouldn't be taught in schools. It's enough to make you nostalgic for the days when the biggest controversy was whether or not you could chew gum in class. Now, some argue that these efforts are about protecting children from harmful ideologies. But critics point out that these measures often stifle free speech, whitewash history, and create a hostile environment for marginalized students and teachers. It's almost as if they're more concerned with indoctrinating kids into a narrow worldview than actually equipping them with the critical thinking skills they need to navigate a complex world. But the battle over education isn't just about curriculum, it's also about who gets to control the narrative. Conservative groups are pouring money into school board races, pushing for patriotic education, and working to install like-minded individuals in positions of power. Meanwhile, progressive educators are fighting back, advocating for inclusive curricula, supporting LGBTQ+ students, and promoting critical thinking and media literacy. It's a battle for the future of education, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Okay, so we've talked about the symptoms of this social conservative resurgence, but what about the underlying causes? Why now? Well, folks, it's complicated, like a relationship status it's complicated. There's no single answer, but rather a confluence of factors that have created the perfect storm for conservatism to make a comeback. One major driver is economic anxiety. In times of uncertainty and hardship, people tend to cling to traditional values and familiar hierarchies. It's a natural human response to seek comfort and stability in the face of chaos. And let's be real, the past few years have been chaotic AF. Pandemic, economic turmoil, political polarization. It's enough to make anyone crave a simpler time, even if that simpler time never actually existed. Another factor is the rise of social media. Platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok have become echo chambers, amplifying extreme viewpoints and creating a breeding ground for misinformation and conspiracy theories. It's like a giant game of telephone, where the message gets more distorted and inflammatory with each retelling. And let's not forget the role of algorithms, which are designed to keep us glued to our screens by feeding us content that confirms our existing biases. It's a recipe for division, distrust, and a whole lot of shouting into the void. Now let's talk about the elephant in the pulpit, or rather, the revival of the religious right. For decades, this group has been a powerful force in American politics, advocating for conservative social policies and mobilizing voters around issues like abortion and same-sex marriage. And it seems they're back with a vengeance, folks, like a televangelist who's discovered the joys of online fundraising. The religious right has been energized by the recent Supreme Court rulings on abortion and religious freedom, seeing these decisions as major victories in their decades-long crusade. They're pouring resources into political campaigns, organizing rallies, and pressuring lawmakers to enact their agenda. And they're finding fertile ground among a segment of the population that feels alienated by the rapid pace of social change and longs for a return to traditional values. But the religious right's resurgence isn't without its critics. Many argue that their agenda is exclusionary, discriminatory, and out of step with the values of a pluralistic society. They point to the group's history of opposing LGBTQ+ rights, promoting creationism in schools, and attempting to impose their religious beliefs on others. It's a clash of worldviews, and it's one that's likely to continue for years to come. So what does this all mean for the future of America? Well, folks, it's not looking pretty. This surge in social conservatism has deepened the already gaping chasm between liberals and conservatives, turning political discourse into a shouting match where no one's listening and everyone's angry. It's like a dysfunctional family Thanksgiving dinner, but on a national scale. The two sides seem to be living in parallel universes, consuming different news, trusting different sources, and speaking different languages. Compromise feels impossible, and common ground seems like a mythical land inhabited by unicorns and reasonable people. This polarization is seeping into every aspect of American life, from our relationships with friends and family to our choices about where we live and work. It's a recipe for gridlock, distrust, and a whole lot of frustrated sighing. But amidst the division and despair, there are glimmers of hope. Grassroots movements are mobilizing, young people are engaging in politics, and conversations about social justice are happening in communities across the country. It's a long and winding road ahead, but the fight for a more just and equitable society continues. Because even in the darkest of times, there's always the possibility of change. Now let's zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture. This shift towards social conservatism isn't unique to the United States. It's a global trend, folks. Like a new season of Squid Game that everyone's talking about. From Europe to Asia to Latin America, conservative movements are gaining traction, fueled by economic anxieties, cultural backlash, and a resurgence of nationalism. These movements often share similar themes: opposition to immigration, skepticism of globalization, and a yearning for a return to traditional values. They tap into people's fears and insecurities, offering simplistic solutions to complex problems. And they often find a receptive audience among those who feel left behind by economic and social change. But the rise of social conservatism isn't just a political phenomenon. It also has profound implications for human rights, social justice, and the future of democracy. As conservative movements gain power, they often erode civil liberties, restrict freedoms, and target marginalized groups. It's a worrying trend, and one that demands our attention and action. So, what does the future hold for American social policy? Well, folks, it's anyone's guess, like predicting the winner of The Masked Singer. But one thing's for sure, this shift towards social conservatism is going to have a major impact on everything from healthcare to education to the environment. Conservative lawmakers are already pushing for policies that restrict access to abortion, limit LGBTQ+ rights, and roll back environmental protections. They're emboldened by their recent successes and determined to push their agenda further, and they're facing pushback from progressives who are equally determined to protect hard-won rights and advance social justice. The outcome of this battle will have a profound impact on the lives of millions of Americans. It will determine who has access to healthcare, who can marry, and who can live free from discrimination. It will shape the future of education, the environment, and the very fabric of American society. Well, folks, there you have it. The rise of social conservatism is a complex and multifaceted phenomenon with far-reaching implications for American society and beyond. It's a story of economic anxiety, cultural backlash, religious revival, and a whole lot of political maneuvering. It's a story that's still being written, and the ending is far from certain. But one thing's for sure, we can't afford to sit on the sidelines and watch as the future unfolds. We need to engage in these debates, challenge misinformation, and fight for the kind of society we want to live in. Because the future of America, and indeed the world, depends on it. So let's get to work, folks, because there's a lot at stake. And remember, even in the darkest of times, there's always hope. And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of humor to help us through it all. That's our show, folks. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to Freedom's Voice for a fresh perspective on today's issues.